I mean, you can't keep a good villain down. So let's do another dipping into classic Doctor Who, and this one is kind of a seminal episode in a lot of ways. It's one of the ones that is generally pretty well regarded. It's kind of a hallmark episode because I'm pretty sure it was the first and one of still now only a handful of episodes in which the Doctor is not traveling with any companion of any kind. I'm speaking, of course, of the winner of the most redundant title award, The Deadly Assassin, starring Tom Baker as the Fourth Doctor. I'm probably going to be getting a little bit more into spoilers on this one than I might otherwise in terms of talking about classic episodes, to get into some of the specifics with my feelings on it. But before I get into spoilers, if you want to know my general thoughts, I like a lot of the ideas in this episode. Unfortunately, there are a lot of specifics about the execution of various elements that don't work for me. Some of it is production. Some of it is I like the big ideas, but then the smaller ideas in terms of how they try and get the big ideas across don't work for me. Some of its performances. There's a lot of little things that drag down what is, in many ways, a really cool idea with a lot of nifty stuff going on, but this is not one I'm going to be in any rush to see again. And I have a sort of a small collection of classic episodes that I really love and want to have on hand. This would not get added to it. So, getting into the specifics. So we've got this story where the Doctor goes to Gallifrey basically after getting a vision of the president being shot. And getting there and then getting framed for that. And it turns out he is being framed by the Master, who hasn't been seen for a while and who is on the verge of dying. And who's doing all of this in order to try and prolong his own life. And he's doing it to get his hands on certain artifacts, the Great Key, the Sash of Rassilon, to try and get to the Eye of Harmony and do what he thinks will allow him to continue to keep on living. So all of that, again, conceptually works. And a lot of the visual aspects of Gallifrey I really like. I like the design of just the interiors of these buildings. It is a cool alien. It's a very 70s, but it's a cool alien looking kind of design. I like the design on the outfits, the big sort of headpieces and the robes. It all looks really good. It looks really cool. But in many ways, this story I feel like I might be able to solidify why I don't like Gallifrey set stories, by and large. And it's because it's always things about it that the more we find out about the Gallifreyans and the Time Lords and that society and how it works, the more mundane it can all feel. And that is always disappointing to me. And I mean that in terms of nuts and bolts. So like stuff that I'm watching, I'm going, really? Is stuff like Gallifrey has a news broadcast that's basically like public television with this doofus looking up at this horrendous camera angle reporting on what's going on. Really? That's how they relay information to the citizens. And it's just such a mundane, everyday Earth thing. And to have it be the way that Gallifrey does things, that sort of thing is just... It always just makes me feel like I just wish I didn't do that. I wish I was left wondering, I wonder how they communicated and got information, whatever was the latest news about what was going on to its people. And I don't even necessarily want to know, but I want to imagine that it's something, really intricate or just, this whole other way of doing things. Like, no, they just do just as a news broadcast. Okay. And that's sort of my thing. Like, I'm fine with the idea. Like I've said before, I don't like the demystifying of Gallifrey. And I feel I need to clarify that, because it's not that I don't want any answers about how Gallifrey functions. It's just that my experience tells me that the writers and or the ability of the production designers either don't have the means or the creativity, or both, to realize something properly alien. And instead we just get very mundane Earth-feeling elements. And I mean, that was one of the things that drove me crazy about Hellbent. Is like, so Gallifrey is Little House on the Prairie? What? You know, it's just, it brings it down to this weird level. And it bothers me with Gallifrey specifically, more so than with any other quote-unquote alien culture that we ever see in Doctor Who, because by and large, usually, they might call them something else, but we're dealing with people who are clearly visually human. And, you know, oftentimes the name that they give them is just related to whatever planet they're on, so it's not a huge leap, especially considering a lot of these stories take place in future settings, that we are still dealing with like some branch of humanity, or, you know, we're dealing with a mixed culture. There's some aliens, there's some humans, and it doesn't bother me in those situations when I see something that is more recognizable as that probably has its roots in Earth. I can kind of roll with that, but like Gallifrey and the Time Lords, it should be something bigger, better than that. Either that or just leave it in the dark. That's what I'd prefer. And that's not to say that, like, I think the Time Lords are this infallible. How dare you sully the Time Lords? Like, I love the fact that their arrogance plays a really big part of this story. The fact that they just assume that their security is fine. Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be? We're Time Lords. No one could beat this security. And I love how that arrogance and that hubris plays into the story, and in many ways the Master is counting on it. So I like that. It's not like I'm saying you can't sully the Time Lords. It's just, don't make them mundane. I mean, make them petty in terms of personality, whatever else, if you want, but don't make that life and the nuts and bolts and the tactileness of that world into something that ordinary. And there are elements of that here, and it's just something I really, really don't like. I mentioned performances, and they're a bit of a mixed bag. Tom Baker's great. Tom Baker is always great. And so that's not even an issue. I actually also really like Barusa. This is his first appearance. I say his first appearance, only time he's played by this actor, but the character crops up a few more times, presumably in other regenerations. You know, that's never said explicitly. But I like him, and I like the dynamic he has with the Doctor. I really love that, you know, he once taught the Doctor, and, you know, the Doctor's like, very good, sir. Can I go now, sir? You know, like a schoolboy talking to his teacher, and Barusa says, Doctor, 9 out of 10. I like that. I like their dynamic. I liked the performance. I liked all that quite a bit. The Master, Peter Pratt playing the Master, I've talked about before when I did my ranking of the Masters, and he did occupy the bottom spot, and it isn't really Peter Pratt's fault, and his performance isn't bad, and I judge that based off the vocal performance, because you can't see him. It's this mask, and it wouldn't be such a problem, except it is supposed to be his face, but it is very clearly a locked off mask. The eyes are unblinking, and yet there's like just this tiny, tiny little movement in the jaw, which just makes it all the more distracting. I don't know how feasible it would have been to shoot it another way, but like, to my way of thinking, they would have been much better off just really cloaking in heavy shadows and only showing the face when he's not talking, like he sees him and, you know, somebody sees him and then he turns away and that's when he does his talking. Like, that would be contrived and a little cheesy too, but unfortunately focusing in and zooming in on that locked off mask that barely moves with these friggin' saucer eyes, it takes me out of it. It hampers the performance, and it brings the Master down, and that's unfortunate, because like I said, Peter Pratt gives a perfectly serviceable performance in the part, but that that mask throws things off much in the same way that Colin Baker's coat throws things off, much in the same way that Colin Baker's coat throws things off in Sixth Doctor stories. I can't look at it and not have it distract me. So that's a problem. The other performance that is just bad is Castellan, who's kind of the security kind of guy. I don't know who that actor was, but he was incredibly wooden. His performance was what I would expect out of the first ever table read of the script. He was very wooden. He was very closed off. It sounded like English was his second language. And I don't just mean that because he had an accent. Like he didn't seem to know how to do inflection in the lines to actually deliver anything, like in terms of emotion or naturalism or anything else. And considering how prominent he was, yeah, that was poor casting. And with things like that, I don't always know how much leeway to give classic episodes, just sort of trying to keep the limitations in mind and knowing, they only probably had kind of this pool of actors to pull from, these limited resources in terms of the visuals and whatever else. But at the same time, I look around and I see other solid supporting performances. I mentioned Barusa, even characters who I don't really like the little Weasley newscaster guy. I don't like that character, but he still performed decently for what was written. The Castellan, no, he's really bad. Sort of coming back to one of the things I said at the front, like I said, there are a lot of big ideas that I like, but then there are the little details that end up not working for me. So like the Matrix is one thing. So like that's a good big idea. It's the computer that the Doctor can enter his mind into. It is being controlled by the Master or the agents of the Master, and it's got all these elements sort of laid in. It's kind of illusion, but it's kind of real, and there's information. There's all stuff going on here. Good ideas. The actual visualization of that is limited both by the practical restrictions of what they could or couldn't afford to do. I do understand that, but at the same time, I feel like they copped out a little bit. Because like when the Doctor's in there and he's seeing all these things that don't necessarily go together, like there's an alligator that snaps at him, and there is a giant spider, and there is this guy wearing a gas mask leading a horse that's wearing a gas mask, and there's a biplane, and the Doctor gets his foot trapped in a railroad track and almost gets run over by a train. And so much of this is just, it comes back to the same thing. It's just Earth stuff. And again, I do understand the practical restrictions of what they had access to. They can't build all this stuff from scratch. They don't have the time or the money, but just one thing to make it clear that not everything that we're seeing in the Matrix is culled from Earth points of reference. Because again, either have it be something completely bizarre like from Gallifrey itself, or just one alien somewhere to just make it clear that this is a mishmash of all these different elements from all these different things, from these different minds and all this stuff. But instead it's all this earthbound stuff. And especially given that the Doctor seems to be the only Time Lord that really cares about the Earth all that much, it's just kind of dull and kind of boring. Like the moments that kind of perked me up on the Matrix was like out of nowhere he steps in this giant egg and it kind of cracks and it's gooey, and like that was weird. Like, why the hell was that there? What is it? What did he just step in? Like, I needed more moments like that. Or even the giant spider, as fake as it looked, was at least something that wasn't just, oh, that's like things we have on Earth or have had at some point in history. And so again, I like the big idea, the Matrix, but the details and how they executed that big idea just kind of took me out of it again. It's not a bad story. And it moves at a good pace, being 4 episodes long. That was a good length for it. again, it's a lot of it in the details, and it's a lot of it is the restrictions that Doctor Who as a show was saddled with. But I'm kind of the mind, if you're restricted so severely in this way that you can't do this stuff justice, maybe do a different story and one that you can do justice, because there's something just really frustrating about a great idea that doesn't have the creativity put into it that it deserves. Or more to that, there's something about, I feel like there's creativity in the big idea, but when it comes to actually figuring out how to execute it, it's written to what resources do we have on hand. And I feel like that's a sort of mishmash of two approaches that I just find frustrating. I figure either write a really good story that's entirely based around the stuff that you have on hand and that you can make and easily acquire, or do a story with the bigger ideas, with the more outlandish stuff, accept the fact that maybe some of the stuff is going to look cheap because you can't afford to build everything from scratch, but at least honor that big idea better than this kind of does. I don't know if what I just said makes any sense at all, but that's sort of my feelings on The Deadly Assassin. Decent story, pretty good script, some good elements, but just a lot of stuff that kept pulling me out of it, and not something I'd be eager to see again. So those are my thoughts on The Deadly Assassin, the latest episode of classic Doctor Who that I have worked my way through. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. All the stuff that you can follow me on elsewhere, from Twitter to podcast to whatever, descriptions are down below. So check it all out, and until next time, this council is adjourned.